listen to another caller now. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I'm calling from Montgomery. This is Ted Kickrider. I'd like to address this to the professor from Duke University. I would like to know the reasons why he thinks we should go back and use machines and computers and all that instead of men in space.
It's not really going back because, of course, we've been using machines since the beginning of the space program, and I'm not suggesting that we should entirely abandon manned space flight. There may be, in fact, be missions in which having the crew on board can significantly improve the capabilities. But with each manned flight, we run tremendous risk. That is, we run greatly increased cost of sending that crew along, and we run the risk of the kind of accident that happened today that inevitably in this kind of enterprise, which we must remember is a very dangerous enterprise, is bound to happen again. And I would like us to think more than we do about the cost of sending men into space and not do it unless we can clearly demonstrate that there's a payoff equal to that risk.
Our telephone number, area code 202-898-7600. Let's hear from another viewer.
Hello.
Thank you for calling.
Yes, I was wondering if, in light of the fact of all the flights they have scheduled for this year, if this could be a safety problem and kind of trying to rush things.
Gentlemen?
That sort of thought just has to pass through your mind, especially with the troubles that the last shuttle flight had and then the troubles that this one had getting off. I would be very much surprised if the people who had to make the decision about whether or not to launch were influenced by that pressure. That is, I think they demonstrated in the last flight that they would resist the pressure however long they had to until they were sure of a safe launch and a safe return, and I just don't believe that played a role today.
Well, the NASA briefing today, they did say, they were asked that very question, and they said there was no pressure. There was no pressure to get this launch off prematurely.
I'm not sure I'd say it quite that categorically, but I think they resisted I think the pressure was intense, but I think they resisted it.
If I can add something to that, I think in the past, NASA has, if anything, been accused of being ultra-conservative. On some of the delays on previous flights, we have sometimes had the impression that that flight could have gone, but NASA was just being so ultra-careful in order to preserve the lives of their astronauts and their vehicles that I think the argument that they suddenly decided to be relaxed and say, oh, what the hell, let's go, I think that doesn't hold in this case. I really feel that before the decision was made to launch, it was considered that everything was properly ready for launch today. I can't believe that they changed their attitude so quickly.
Well, I think Bernie, I'd like to make a comment, too, relative to the delays. Because of the visibility of this program, delays are always outward and shown and in the press. It can be shown, I believe, by studies that the manned spaceflight program, the shuttle in particular, has fewer delays and gets off the pad faster from the time it's assembled vertically than any expendable launch vehicle in our inventory. It is a very successful program and very timely compared to other launch vehicles.
Let's hear from another caller. You're on the air.
Hi, Bernie.
Hi there.
Good job.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott, you've had some eloquent things to say, and so has Jake Garn today. My comment is directed, I think, at Professor Rowland. We have logged, the Space Shuttle program, has logged 50 million miles without an accident. We haven't had this kind of a catastrophic event in 26 years. Your comments with regard to non-manned space travel, I think, is irrelevant. And I just don't understand it. Yes, it is catastrophic. I think the people that are involved understand the risks. And this kind of thing, while it can elicit our sympathy, your comments, I think, are unwarranted. That's all I had to say.
There are two kinds of risks, I would suggest. Indeed, all the people who volunteer to be astronauts take the risks associated with the flight, and they know them much better than most of us do. But all the rest of the American taxpayers take a risk as well. That is, we pay considerable amount of extra money for these manned flights. And my concern is simply that we're not getting our money's worth out of that money that we're paying for manned spaceflight.
Let's hear from another viewer. You're on the air. Thanks for calling.
Yes, hello?
Hello.
Yeah, I'd like to ask astronaut David Scott if there is a way that the technicians can do NDI, non-destructive inspections of various components within the shuttle systems and any other type of material inspection prior to a flight. And if that could be well, obviously could be a possible factor, but if there's a way they could do this at the last minute.
Well, they do this. They do this throughout the testing of the vehicle and the preparation for the launch. It's a very intensive and thorough testing from the component and the element through the subsystem to the system. And in fact, NDT and NDI are the kinds of things that NASA's a forerunner on. So I think the technology and the technicians do everything we know today in order to ensure the safety and the integrity of the vehicle before it's launched.
We're going to go to thank you for calling. We're going to go to another viewer who's waiting, as are many viewers on all our lines, but we want to thank David Scott, former Apollo and Gemini astronaut, before he gets away. He has another commitment, and he's going to be easing out very shortly. But, David, we wanted to thank you right now for coming in.
Thank you, Bernie. I enjoyed the questions very much.
Thank you. Let's go to line 9. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I was wondering about the possibility of pilot error on this. I know it's a far-fetched idea, but I'd seen earlier where the shuttle was rigged to self-destruct. Should it go off course, whatever, toward a major city?
David, it sounds like that question has about 3 or 4 elements. What about the step-by-step process? He's gone?
David seems to be disconnected, so why don't I take that one over and
yes,
let
please
you know.
do.
The shuttle at this point in the flight is still under the control of the computers. The pilots have not as yet taken control. The operation is principally from the ground. With regard to a self-destruct, the shuttle is not equipped with self-destruct devices. No manned spacecraft are. Unmanned spacecraft are often equipped with self-destruct devices to avoid damaging anything on the ground. I think that covers the question that was asked.
Caller, are you alluding to the booster or the spacecraft? You're talking about the booster.
No, the booster. You know, the boosters, the 2 solid rocket boosters, do have destruct devices on board, but actually they are parachuted into the water. The problem here today certainly did not seem to be the solid rocket boosters. As David mentioned earlier, all of the photography indicated that they continued on course pretty much as you might expect after the destruction of the vehicle.
Okay,
Jerry. Problem, yeah, go ahead. That's enough. I think I've covered it.
Okay, but caller, just before we cut away, before we return, you were referring to the booster. I just want to be clear about our terminology because
yes,
some of this...
Yes, sir.
Okay, you were talking about the boosters rather than the space shuttle itself.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for calling. 202 is the area code, 898-7600. This is our continuing coverage of the tragedy that occurred today. Larry King is away, and we'll be right back with more of your phone calls and more responses from our guests. Welcome back to our extended coverage of what happened today with the Challenger shuttle. We are getting more phone calls. Which line should we go to? Let's go to line 1. You're on the air.
Yes, good evening, sir. My name is James Bursall from New York, and I have 2 questions, if I may, to the professor, if he possibly can answer it. Number 1, yesterday, a hatch door lock got jammed, and when the technicians came up to repair it, the equipment did not operate. Namely, the battery was dead in the drill. This shows that there is some type of coordination that is not proper on the maintenance staff. The second question would be on computers. Computers operate extremely quickly. The computer would operate much quicker than human mind could to separate the shuttle from the rocket. This, in fact, did not happen. Why, or do they have a backup where the computer will separate the vehicle from the rockets? This would be my question. Thank you kindly.
Okay, if that was addressed to me, 2 parts. First of all, the sort of comedy of errors we saw yesterday with the door latch. I think, as Mr. Scott said, that's just because NASA has been so open about this program. That is, they allow cameras in to cover every detail of a launch, and inevitably, with that kind of complex technological enterprise, that sort of thing is going to happen, and it's a great embarrassment when it's broadcast coast to coast. The other question, I think, is perhaps more significant. That is, why didn't the orbiter separate from the fuel tank when something started to go wrong? And again, we are just speculating, but my guess would be that this was a catastrophic failure, one entirely unanticipated by any of the programs that were put into the computers. Those programs there, the safety programs, are there to save the orbiter in the event of an engine shutdown, a fuel failure or something that might be anticipated. This seems to have been entirely unanticipated catastrophic failure, and the computer simply couldn't do anything about it and probably didn't have time to do anything about it.
Professor Flandreau, do you have any thoughts on that from Georgia Tech in our Atlanta Bureau?
I certainly agree that this is something that just happened much too rapidly for the computers to really save the spacecraft. It was in a very vulnerable spot, really a point in the flight where you just really couldn't save it from that kind of an explosion. I wonder if we could come back, though, to the point about whether there might have been some question of NASA being a little bit in a hurry to get this flight off. I do have some concerns here, and this again goes back to the behavior of the propulsion system, especially under the very low temperature environment that the spacecraft was allowed to be in for several days. It's well known that the propulsion system can be adversely affected, and I think it's true that these motors that are used, the two solid boosters in particular, have not been qualified really to operate at that low a temperature.
To our caller in New York, we thank you. Let's go again to another viewer. You're on the air.
Yes, hello there.
Hello.
I was concerned about this is a reusable vehicle. Okay, the hydrogen tanks on that vehicle, is it possible it's getting wore out, and how do they check this?
Jerry Gray?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. The hydrogen tank, in fact, the large propellant tank, is the only major component on the shuttle system that is not reusable. It's a brand new tank for every flight. The tank is the one item that's disposed of in the ocean after it served its purpose. So it could not have been worn out or improperly designed in any other way. It was simply a brand new tank.
Okay, let's go to another viewer. You're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to ask the professor from Georgia Tech, given the pictures that we saw today, what are the actual chances that anything will be found which was wrong with the shuttle, or will it never be known?
Well, I think that our best hope is to get some of the telemetry data and also any flight recordings that might hopefully have survived. I think that's our best hope of discovering what really indeed happened. There's a little evidence in the photographic coverage, but of course it's very difficult to make any really firm decisions on that basis alone. So we're going to have to wait for the detailed telemetry data to really discover what happened.
There were some excellent camera photos taken that have not yet been released downrange, and my understanding is that they are very high quality, and when they are computer enhanced and blown up, that there may be some additional information available as well. Although I agree with Professor Flandreau, the bulk of the useful information will probably come from the telemeter data.
Does anyone have any idea how long it's going to take NASA to pull together an investigation?
If I were NASA, I would have everybody in the place working 24 hours a day until they find out, because this is obviously something that needs to be established before the program can continue, and everyone at NASA is committed to that continuation.
Let's hear from another viewer. You're on the air.
Hello, I'm calling from College Park, Maryland. I want to respond to the professor from Duke's allegation, if I could.
Please do.
He is saying that we shouldn't send manned space flights into outer space, and that's good in some cases when you're sending a probe out to Jupiter or Uranus, like the Voyager 2 mission. But what do you do when something like solar maximum malfunctions in outer space, and you need to repair the thing, and it'd be better if you went up with a manned space flight and repaired it, rather than sending another solar maximum up, which would cost at least twice the amount of money. You were talking about the reason we want to send manned space flight. We don't want to send manned space flight up is because you want to save money, but in this case, you'd be spending more money than you would if you sent the space shuttle up to fix something like this.
Okay, well, that's a very good point. In fact, the rescue of the Solar Max mission might have been the most dramatic success of the shuttle so far, the clearest demonstration of the usefulness of man in space. But remember that we were able to put man in space before we developed the shuttle, before we invested the 14 or 15 billion dollars that we put into that, and we can buy a lot of solar maximum missions for 14 or 15 billion dollars.